Here we are back to Brighty of the Grand Canyon. This is the next chapter called The Deserted Cabin. See that cabin? Through aisles of aspen and pine, Brighty headed for Uncle Jim's cabin. He ignored the man's pull on his tail and the whining cry behind. His small hoofs caked with ice shuffled in and out of the snow with rhythmic strength. He could feel rope burns on his sides where the straps had rubbed, and his pack had grown very heavy, but there was a happy purpose in his steps. He confidently entered the lane, winding down into the meadow, but now his eyes saw it. He stopped dead. A chill of fear swept over him. The meadow was a glaze of white, a sealed-in land, all emptiness. There was no sign of life anywhere. No creature stirred, no man, nor mule, nor hound, not even a bird. Everything had changed. Where green grass had been, there was instead this smooth crystal sea, and the cabin was most changed of all. It looked littler, and it crouched down in the corner of the meadow like some white-haired crone with window glass eyes. Brighty stood helpless in the quiet world of white. Except for the black smudges of his eyes, he was now frosted too, like the meadow and the trees and the little cabin. The rainbow had faded, and the low sun threw only the palest of shadows across the snow. Slowly, Brighty shuffled toward the cabin. He stopped in front of the porch and sounded a long, drawn bray. His ears tipped forward, listening, but there was no answering sound. All he heard was his heart beating, and all he saw was a spume of smoke churning in a little gust of wind. The cabin door remained closed. As the silence continued, Irons came alive. He let go of Brighty's tail and glanced up at the cabin chimney to make sure the gray wisp above it was cloud but not smoke. Then he stamped onto the porch, and he knocked loudly on the door. He waited a moment, his breath becoming a hoarse whisper in the stillness. Then, turning sideways, he threw his body against the door. It flew open so easily he fell sprawling on his face. Brighty stepped in over him and halted in bewilderment. The place seemed colder than the out of doors. A hat and a jacket hung on a wall, but the smells they gave off were old and faint. He brayed to bring the place alive, but all it did was to stir Jack Irons. The man sat up, rubbing his shins while he stared intently around the room as if his eyes might be playing tricks. He picked himself up and pushed at the walls to make sure they were real. Then they did not budge. When they did not budge, he closed the door behind him and gave Brighty a jolt with his knee. "Not bad, Jughead," he laughed harshly. "Not half bad." Still remembering his dream, he shoved a trunk-sized box against the door and then looked about. He noted the readiness of the room, the bunk made up, the logs stacked beside the fireplace, the canned goods lined up store neat, and the kerosene lamp with wick trimmed and waiting. He blew on his hands to warm them, then picked up a log and whittled chips of kindling. He shook some kerosene over the kindling and laid it on 2 logs, lighting the fire. He cackled in relief as the flames leapt up. The heat felt good to Brighty, too. He gave himself a violent shake, spraying snow over the entire room. "Get away from me, you wet rat!" Irons swung around and struck Brighty with the flat of his hand. The startled burro backed up, his hindquarters pushed against a door that squeaked open. Irons shoved him on through and peered into the darkness of a small lean-to. He grinned when he saw the little room was filled with logs. Not bothering to remove Brighty's pack, he stooped his way out, letting the door wind shut behind him. Brighty paced restlessly in the blackness. He hungered for light and warmth, and most of all for food to quiet the pinching of his belly. He butted the door, then turned and kicked it. But suddenly he felt very tired, and his kicking was half-hearted. A boot came crashing against the door on the other side, and a second boot. And after a while there was a fainter noise, 10 dishes clicking together, the slurping sound of soup and coffee, and after many minutes a watch being wound, followed almost at once by a steady snoring. When the trembling in Brighty's legs had quieted, he peeled the log with his teeth, slowly chewing the bitter bark. Then he nosed carefully along the wall, trying to find the green logs. Halfway around, his muzzle snatched something that gave to his bunting. He bunted it again. The thing was a rough textured, and it made a rustling noise. He remembered that noise. Oats, exquisite oats. With a grunt of joy, he ripped a hole in the gunny sack, and then his muzzle was in among the plump kernels. A pleasant feeling flowed into him as his grinders made meal of the grain, and the juices in his mouth turned it into a delicious mush. He lipped enough powerful and another he lipped another mouthful and another, and after a while he stopped eating, his small belly satisfied. A warmth surged through his body. With his 4 feet inside the bag and in the snug little nest he had made, he too slept and snored. The next chapter is called Thief's Plunder. Look, there he is. There's Brighty, and there's his sack. While Bright Angel slept, the warm comfort spread all through him, and he forgot he was trapped. But when he awakened, he stared about in panic. Even in the darkness of the lean-to, his time sense told him it was morning. He cried out for his freedom, screaming and pawing. On the other side of the door, Jack Iron sat bolt upright, surprised to find himself in a bunk. He got up, rubbed his sore muscles, and hobbled stiff-legged to the window. All was whiteness. The sea's snow billowed away to a shore of snow-frosted trees, and the trees swept up the snow-veined slope to puffs of white cloud. But off to the north, the sky was beginning to pink. Irons rubbed his hands together, and his smile was a gash in his beard. His lips moved, forming the words, Utah, Utah. And he turned from the window and got to work, stirring the fire, piling on more wood. Meanwhile, the noise in the shed grew more insistent. "Shut up, you flop-eared fool!" Iron shouted as he thinned the flapjack batter. Brighty heard the cakes drop into the fat with a sizzle, and his nose caught the sweet smell. With one mighty kick, he crashed through the door, wood splintering in all directions. The two creatures wheeled around to face each other. In the awesome silence that followed, the man seemed to stop breathing. Then the dark anger in his face changed to cunning. "If I didn't need you to break trail," he bit off the words, "I'd whack this skillet over your head. Now back up, you shaggy brute, after I've et, I'll give you the leavings." But Brighty stood his ground, stood watching while the cakes were turning. "I suppose," the man sneered, "you'd like yours all doused in honey and cooled so's not to burn your pretty pink tongue." He squinted his eyes until they were slits. "Well, maybe there won't be none left." He stacked his cakes 4 deep and drenched them with molasses until it dripped from the plate. Then he ate his way fiercely through the stack. At last, unable to swallow more, he set the leavings before Brighty, who nosed them a long time before he could stomach the taint on them. While Brighty ate, Iron's hands and eyes were busy. He removed the burro's pack and opened it out so that he could add new plunder. Last night he had been too tired to investigate the big box he had pushed against the door. Now eager fingers unfastened the lid and greedy eyes peered in. A jacket lay on top. Off with his mackinaw, on with the jacket. Next he lifted out a pair of small-sized boots and held them up, squawking. "Wouldn't you know it, a runt of a man!" He threw the boots across the room in disgust. Brighty picked one up in his teeth and shook it as a dog would. Then he sat down, letting the boot lean against him. The bearded face was back in the box. Like any pack rat, the man was trading. A good felt hat for his ragged one, a pair of wool socks to be worn as mittens in place of his work gloves, another pair of socks for his own holy ones, some soft doeskin moccasins for his worn shoes. Then back in the box again, hands seeking more, filling in among the folds of a blanket, feeling and finding a smooth leather case. With a shout of discovery, Irons lifted it out and unsheathed the beautiful rifle. Hungry hands slapped the polished stock, slid a testing forefinger against the trigger, then along the shiny barrel, then back again to the stock, now fingering the gold plate. Stealthily, the man looked toward the window and then over his shoulder as if he expected someone to be watching. "Only Broomtail," he whispered, turning his back so that even Brighty could not see. He held the stock up to the light to make out the wording. Eyes accustomed to reading spelled out the letters one by one. TOJAMESOWEN to James Owen. FROMHISFRIEND from his friend. THEODOREROSEVELT Theodore Roosevelt. For an instant he looked at the shininess of the plate, then he pulled out his pocket knife and loosed the gold screws. With a quick motion of his arm, he flung the plate into the fire. Now he moved more slowly, taking care not to forget anything, the coffee and the canned goods and the box of matches on the mantel. He packed the load on Brighty, lashed down the pots and pans and stolen things, all but the rifle. He tried to tighten the cinch, but Brighty blew himself up. I hope you bust, Iron spat out the words as he gave a mighty tug. Tonight I'll be rid of you. I'll be in Utah, and then... His voice was a mocking sing-song. Then I'm just an innocent beaver trapper come to sell my skins. He poked the muzzle of the rifle into Brighty's flanks, and with a laugh drove him out of the cabin. Ah! No good. Oh, well, there you go. More next time. Bye.